I think we are live, we've been told. So welcome everyone. My name is Menachem Creditor. It is my honor to welcome a dear friend of mine, Julia Knobloch, who is many, many things and many things to me. And so I want to share first some of her bio and then my own feeling and gratitude. And then we'll have a good conversation together. Julia is a student at the Ziegler School of Rabbinical Studies in Los Angeles, a Jewish nonprofit professional who has worked for UJA-Federation of New York, which is where we met, and the Union for Reform Judaism. She is also the author of 2 poetry collections. She was born and raised in Germany, where she graduated Heidelberg University with a degree in Romance languages and philosophy, and has lived in France, Portugal, and Argentina. And we worked down the block from each other, which was a glorious way to come into the world of sort of nonprofit philanthropy, but specific Jewish values-driven nonprofit work. And Julia, you are someone that I really, really value in the world. How we continue to intersect as writers and poets and people has been really special for me. And so what we are theoretically doing is talking about my most recent book called A Rabbi's Heart, which is selected writings of mine from 2006 to 2017, where I really poured out so much of my heart's response to things happening in the world. But this experience of sharing, conversations with other thought leaders has been much bigger than just looking at a book. It's been more about the conversations that are alive today that I might have been having in my own head back then, but thinking with thinkers. So if it's all right with you, I'd love to ask you a question to start.
Of course.
So you are a rabbinical student who began her rabbinical studies during an incredibly intense and tumultuous period of global history. And I look at classes I teach and friends that I have where we were in each other's physical spaces and then had to transition. But given the history of the relationships that we had, we were transitioning, carrying those created relationships into the digital space. You are in a place of formative leadership training and literacy building. Rabbinical school is many, many things. I considered it very womb-like as my experience. And I'm wondering if you could reflect on what it is to be in training for Jewish leadership with others, but those others for so long, and I'm not sure what the current situation is, have been virtual chavrutas, right? Like this visceral friendship of studying together. I'm wondering how the experience has been for you and what you've learned from it that likely I haven't, because I haven't been on the learning side as much.
Yeah, that's an amazing question. And before I answer that, I also just want to say at least a minute how much I am honored to be here and how much I value and appreciate our friendship that has grown over not that many years. We're like, it's been just 2 years, but it feels, especially this past year, feels way longer in a way. When I look back, March 2020 is, just a little over a year ago. That's when I applied for Ziegler and I flew out. And even though Corona was already around, but it was still possible anyway. So it hasn't been that long of a time in years, but it feels like a long time in terms of connection and just shared, special moments. And down the block on the 5th floor at the Federation building, I remember when we exchanged our books. You put a book on my desk with a sweet note, and I put one on your desk, and it's been just so fruitful and amazing since then. So thanks for having me. And the fact that I am at Ziegler now is also partly due to your care and support. I mean, I remember the first session when we opened the Mishnah with me and taught me the beginning, and you must have written an amazing reference letter for me, because so I just want to frame this also for people to get a sense of how much I how much I think we have given each other, but I also like how much you really have been instrumental in my way to being where I am right now. And I want to thank you for that. And to answer your question, yes, it's been a rough year, actually. It's been difficult. Like, I'm not going to, it's been exciting, and I've learned a lot, even though now that my finals are almost over and I'm looking back at this first year, it feels like a whirlwind in one way. So talking about the perception of time, it's like, on one hand, March 2020, May 2020, August 2020, when I moved to LA, seems so long ago. And at the same time, it just feels like, wait, what all happened at this time? And so when I first came to LA, it was clear that we were going to be on Zoom. So that I already knew that. And but LA was doing okay in terms of numbers of infections. So there were some in-person davening possible, and people were meeting in the park here or there. And I did as much as I could to explore what I thought was going to become my new Jewish community. And it didn't really work because pretty soon after that, the numbers went high, and then we went into lockdown, and I didn't have the connections that I had in Brooklyn, where I had like a really solid community where we would even, meet as much as possible. So here I was in a city that is already, as I've been told, and as I have experienced, harder to grasp in terms of like, where is its actual center? Is there even a center? Does there need to be a center? How do I make community in a place where everything is sort of like spread out? Whereas in New York, everything is more condensed, right? Like, just by virtue of the place and the space, we just there's one shul next to the other. I mean, not that in Pico Robertson there aren't also many shuls next to each other, but I think you know what I'm saying in terms of like how it feels and how easy it is sort of like to walk around. And I couldn't go to, like, there wasn't a kiddush, and I couldn't invite people, which I love. That's how I try to, like, I love hosting people, and I would have invited so many more people. And so for quite a while, I was sitting in my Zoom classes studying, introduction to Mishnah, introduction to everything, Chumash with Rashi and Talmud with Rashi, and sort of like really wondering, how is this going to work? How am I going to find community? And now that we are opening up again, it's great, and I'm very hopeful. And I will also say that it feels like it's hard right now, because I think I've already tried to find the community, and now doing it, having to come out of this vacuum and sort of like looking at it as if I hadn't tried it, if I hadn't been here for a year, has been challenging. I should say, I'm fortunate. I was just recently accepted as one of the rabbinic residents at Temple Beth Am in Los Angeles. So I'll be becoming more involved over the summer, and then specifically as come the fall with that congregation. And I hope, obviously, that there's going to be a lot of connections possible, and just me trying to find my way in the Los Angeles Jewish community, which I don't really know yet, right? I mean, I am still looking at my life here with my Brooklyn Jewish community, Manhattan Jewish community, sort of like, then we'll see. I mean, I'm excited, and I think this is going to, and has already taught lessons that are going to be invaluable, hopefully for me, as when I will be a rabbi, or even before, just in terms of helping people to find groundings in times that are really don't offer grounding, and trying to center yourself in sort of like redefining or like examining what is the purpose, what was the goal, why I actually came here, and why did I want to do that. And that kind of also speaks to you know, some, like many of those essays in your book, it speaks to the title of your book, those questions.
I appreciate that. And I'm going to pause from all the questions that I have in mind so that we can hear the ones maybe that you have, but I just wanted to reflect back to you the purpose of why I am here. It's so interesting to think about what here means.
Mm-hmm.
Right, you're here, right? The place where you are mentally is, you know, deeply connected to where you were, because the physical place where you are, you haven't been able to physically experience.
Mm-hmm.
It's so fascinating, the gift of being present in such an available way in the world, which these digital platforms allow, also dislocates us from the physical place where we actually are. Absolutely. Yes. So let me hand it to you, because we could talk about that meta way of being, which is only part of, I think, what a rabbi is called to do. We're called to be present in the world, which probably also means to be located in a specific part of it. With people. I mean, that is the other thing. I mean, I have explored some of Los Angeles, you know, tangible geography. I've been on some excursions to the beach, to the desert, I went skiing, which is amazing. Like, that's really great here. But I haven't experienced this place with people. I mean, I have now. I'm beginning to, and throughout the months, I also wasn't like entirely isolated. I did have, you know, social interactions. But I remember, especially in November, December, when into January, when the lockdown was really strict, and I was walking through these empty streets. Like, everything was empty: palm trees and banana plants and beautiful Spanish-style houses and stretched out long avenues, and nobody. I was like, where am I? So definitely, and with my heart and memories still, you know, back east. What you wanted to, I got lost in my description of my nighttime walks with MT Pico Robertson. Well, that means that they were good walks, right? They were actually. I mean, I was going through a lot of stuff, but they were good. They were very meditative, and it was really good to like reassure me, like, why did I come here, and what am I going to do with that gift also that I have, to have these years to study, right? I think I was interested. I mean, I'm interested in so many aspects of your book and of your thinking, and I know there's just like such a big palette of things that you care about, but having mentioned the passing of time and how we feel it, I was reminded of one question that came up as I was reading some of your essays on so many varied topics. How some of these essays, if you change a few, you know, names that you refer to, or a place, some of them are like more than 10 years old, but they could have been written today. And I was curious about how you, as you were putting together this book, how you were thinking about your process of looking at perceiving these things that you care about, and what you may have learned and, you know, or discarded, or how you feel about seeing, basically you're looking at yourself in, you know, in this time span. And I was just curious if you could speak to that. That's a really well phrased question, because it's both about the methodology of putting a book together, but also looking in the mirror. Mm-hmm. And this book, as opposed to some of the other ones that I've done, the books that we've shared and collaborated on, this one is my voice, and my voice over a significant period of time. And among the things that I discovered while reviewing the manuscript is that I've changed. I've changed my mind on some issues. I've certainly changed my tone on on almost every issue. There was a willingness I had in the past, maybe because of pain I was feeling, which is, these years were not easy. No years are easy, we've learned, but these years were particularly fraught for me and for the world. And I think that I can more effectively marshal people's attention in a practical way toward the vision that I have for the world now that I was not able before. I think that I was successful, if that's such a thing, at getting people's attention before and speaking in a very clear and passionate way. And I don't regret those things, but I was also willing to use language that alienated potential allies from conversations.
Yeah.
And I hope that that's changed. I don't feel less fierce about things. But because I remain as passionate as I am, and because I want to build this world toward a vision of goodness that I feel, I want to do it in a way that builds friendships and partnerships, because otherwise there is no future vision of my world manifest, because I'm all alone feeling the way I feel. Right. I'm more interested in us getting there together. And I don't feel less right about my vision for the world now than I did then, but I'm much more invested in sharing it.
Yeah, thank you. We will build this world with love. That was your song was before I knew you, I knew your song. And I remember how excited it was when I realized that you were my colleague at UJA.
Do you remember how in shock I was when they painted the mural on our floor? Yes. And like down the hall from where I work was a song I wrote for my daughter's naming, for her Simchat Bat. And we dedicated the mural singing. It was this coming together of so many different facets of life.
I've been thinking about, that floor and that wall and this beautiful message on it and how it's been sitting there alone and empty for quite a few months, year. Almost.
We have that phrase in Eicha.
The city sits lonely.
Yoshevet Badad, exactly.
Yeah.
And there's it's not the same at all, but I remember the first time I went back to shul was just a couple months ago, and opening the Aron so we could take a Torah out. I couldn't touch the Torah. It was, distance, but I was like, the Torah has been waiting for us. Like I've been so aching to be present with Torah physically. So anyway, it just came to mind.
Yeah. I wanted to, I don't know. When I was reading this essay that I think arguably gave the book its title in your book, A Rabbi's Heart Beats Again. When you were, I think I was curious to learn more about that story, because having gone through this first year of rabbinical school and sort of like still defining how I will see myself as a religious leader, as a Jewish leader, as a leader in general, to begin with, is a weird word for me to use or to look at myself. And how you felt so encouraged by actually my school's dean's story that he told there, and you might want to speak to this a little bit, because I'm like, there's so many things that we go through as humans that especially, I don't want to say especially, but being humans, having feelings, being passionate, having hopes and dreams, and seeing that often, like even with the best of intentions, we end up like not getting to that place of peace and connection that we hope for and strive for, and then that can cause us frustrations, and it can cause disappointments and like all these things. And especially when we do this as I think there it's fair to say, especially as a person leading something, whatever it is, in our case, maybe a congregation or just being a representative of like this millennial, like thousands and thousands of year old faith and culture. How do we keep it going? How does the rabbi's heart keep beating, despite, downfalls that everyone experiences? And then sometimes as a rabbi, I imagine, or as a religious leader of whatever faith, it doesn't, I think it's applicable to anything. How does it, how do you manage this?
That's maybe the deepest question. We hear about Avram Avinu in a midrash, because when we're introduced to Avram, right before his name was changed, and he gets called by God. That was my bar mitzvah parsha, so I feel like I really relate to Lech Lecha. That was my bar mitzvah.
Yeah.
Right, my father's bar mitzvah, my sister's bat mitzvah, my son's bar mitzvah. It's a
wow, yeah, that's deep. That's deep.
It is, and we hear about him because the rabbis are trying to figure out, like, what was so special? Why did he merit this call from God? And there's a parable or a story told that he was wandering through the world and saw, in Hebrew, Bira Doleket, right? And you can say an illuminated castle. I think I have a piece on that in the book too. An illuminated castle, or you could describe it as a palace on fire.
Right.
And those are two ways of taking note of the world, because this world is on fire. And that's not just right now. It is certainly right now, but not just right now. And this world is also exquisitely beautiful. And Avram's journey, what made him worthy of note in the rabbinic imagination, was that he noticed it. And we hear this about different figures in biblical history and in human history, that it's the people who pay attention, what Michael Fishbane calls sacred attunement. And on the one hand, it's exhausting. It's exhausting. So Julia, like your question, how do we keep our hearts beating when we're in positions of vulnerable leadership? And we want to be people who get tired. And working as a rabbi, it is the most glorious and often seductive thing, because people turn to us. They trust us. They ask us big questions, and we merit to be in a place of real humanity in their lives. And because of how open their hearts are in those moments and how open we want our hearts to be, we also get hurt sometimes because people don't always act kindly, and communal needs falling on a person, even in the best of moments, is hard. So I'll tell you that my answer also has changed over time. During a lot of this book, I was writing like I was running out of time, right? It's a line from Hamilton.
Yeah.
Sometimes it was because I was in deep pain and needed a place to pour it out. And I look back at some of these essays and I wonder, was it always wise to pour it out in public?
I have some poems published where I wonder, should I have really published them?
Yeah, my poetry book, which fewer people have read, I sort of say, thank God fewer people have read it.
I've read it.
Well,
I'm among them.
There's a reason we understand each other so well. But what I want to say is that understanding what I need and really taking to heart the core teaching, the golden rule as articulated in Vayikra and in Leviticus, right? V'ahavta l'recha kamocha. Love your neighbor as yourself. The hardest part of that for people, at least for me, but maybe for people like us, I don't want to impose, is the kamocha. Like, I'm really good at loving my neighbor. But how can I really love my neighbor if I don't love myself? If I don't have the right kind of self-love, which is not arrogance or ego-driven, it's the recognition that I am one of the people that God has called me to serve. I have to take care of me. The image of God that is in me is special too. So sometimes recently, I literally do what I'm doing right now. I just put my hands on my own chest and I remind myself by feel to breathe. And there are times where I have become so overextended, I can't even see. Like because of the way I don't know if you have one of the lights like I do, I've got like one of the circle lights to make sure that the lighting works on a Zoom, like my eyes are getting burned.
Oh, yeah.
And that tells me that I need to just stop. I usually use a phrase, I think the author's name was Colm Wilkerson or something like that. He's a chiropractor, and he talks about the early days of his career. He said, I wanted to use my hands to heal. So that's what I do. But the first time someone wanted to pay me for what my hands are called to do, I felt like I shouldn't use my hands for that. And then I realized if I don't accept payment for the healing that I provide, my hands will fall off, and then I'm no good for anyone. So I actually think, as much as the words self-care have been too bandied about recently to be understood, and I say this to you as my friend and my teacher, and as someone who I know is going to make a very big impact in whatever kind of rabbinate you lead, you're needed. You're really needed. And whatever you need is part of your rabbinic work.
Thank you. It's good to have this reassurance and support, because, like even though we are passionate and love things, it is important to get validation from the outside.
Yeah.
So yeah. I had a thought while you were speaking. It goes a little bit to something else, but it is connected, actually, I think. You've used the word to pour out a lot in this conversation, and it just reminded me, and now I'm blanking on the Hebrew. So, I mean, I'm just a first-year student, so I haven't really studied anything in extent, like in depth, but we've just been exposed to various, so we heard from Talmud about prayer and blessings and all sorts of things. And there was one just recently where they're debating, what is prayer, and what does it stand for? And is it, the famous, like, is it a continuation of the sacrifices, or is it like, pouring, like the word for pouring out comes up a lot, like pouring out this conversation, pouring out your heart, pouring all these things. And that's one thing that I'm like thinking about in terms of how we relate to our religious rituals, duties, practices, and how does that inform how I'm going to see myself as a rabbi? And at the same time, another essay in your book, the one where you were talking about, it's about Parsha Tetzaveh, which was actually the Parsha where I gave the devar for my interview when I was interviewing at Ziegler. That was the week, so my devar for the interview was on Tetzaveh, is about the high priest, about the clothing, about all, and then you were writing about how Aaron represents this set apart. So this, like, if we want to, this part of the rabbinate or the priest or function figure connected with sacrifices, and then there's Moses on the other hand, who is the other side of this whole leadership of the Israelites. He pours out all the time, and he, even though he has this alleged speech impediment, whatever that means, and whatever that is supposed to tell us, but he is the one who's pleading and who's talking and who's pouring out and who is part of the people. And I mean, I kind of summed up what you were saying, I think, but I just wanted to share that I'm like still thinking a lot about, as I will, be shaping my identity as a future rabbi, in terms of like, where do I lean to? How am I going to relate to myself and to people who see me as a rabbi, am I going, how am I going to pour out my heart and at the same time also have this sort of, set aside figure? Do I need that? And I'm just curious to hear your advice, since you're like way ahead of me in your rabbin.
Let me say this: way ahead is such a relative statement. You started by saying you're just a first year. Think about people who aren't considering rabbinical school, or each of us represent essential learning for the other. And the best way to bring it out, I think, is by recognizing how humble we should feel by whatever it is we do and whenever it is we're doing it. I'll tell you that Moshe is such an interesting example, though, from which we can derive a lot of thoughts and suggestions. Remember, he's not like Aaron. Aaron is set aside as the high priest and has this fantastic garb and has a headband that says dedicated to God. Like, you walk around and you literally have a neon sign and blinking bells all around you saying, watch out, here comes God's servant. You are literally a walking symbol.
Right.
And, there have been times in Jewish history, and there are still rabbis today who walk around as symbols. Famously, Rabbi Jack Bloom, who had, Alav Shalom, who had a book that I remember reading, impacting me a lot, called By the Power Vested in Me, the Rabbi as Symbolic Exemplar. He wanted to learn with a specific mentor who agreed to teach him as long as he never allowed anyone to call him by his first name.
Mm-hmm.
So no one could call him Jack. And I remember speaking with him about it and how he was in mourning for his own name. And that influenced me as a rabbi when I emerged to give a talk. I was an assistant rabbi in a shul in Sharon, Massachusetts. And I said, don't call me rabbi. When you call me rabbi, you're asking me for something. Mm-hmm. I want to be your friend. Call me Menachem. Mm-hmm. And I did two things there. One of them is I humanized myself, but the other one is because I really didn't have any experience as a rabbi, I sort of cut that out from my experience because I wasn't walking around as a symbol. Moshe is different than Aaron, except that when he has his own revelatory moment, light is shooting out of his face, and it's too intense for people. And so he puts a mask over, a masveh over his face so that people can look, because otherwise they're afraid of him. And I got to say, one of the dangers of religious leadership is we are so passionate. Some of us speak quietly, but we're all driven. Mm. And the intensity of this holy experience, and I read Tanakh and I read rabbinic literature and I look at the world, and if I'm not cautious, what Rabbi Shimon Bar Yochai did when he comes out of the cave in that famous story is something that I feel happening in me, which is fire starts shooting out. And not only can that be harmful because fire burns, it's also just too much. It's too much to share. I remember being told early on in my career by someone who I had a very strong and positive connection with, Rabbi, right? They still called me Menachem sometimes, but he really was telling me something as rabbi. He said, Rabbi, we're trying to drink and you're a fire hydrant. And so, there are ways that the symbolic nature of being a public leader is inescapable, especially when you're a traditional Jew and you're out. I used to shop right before Trader Joe's would close. So I'd run into fewer people and be able to just get the shopping done. Mm-hmm. But every once in a while, I'd get there at a normal hour and someone would look into my cart to see what I was buying. Is it all hechshered?
Right.
He's getting it, I can get it. And it's complicated. It's complicated, but I will say this. Having a boundaried life is very important as a rabbi, because there will come moments where rabbinic vulnerability is not something that a not rabbi understands. We are trying our best, and maybe we'll talk about this soon, to navigate a really thorny world and trying not to hurt people as we speak our truths and trying to remain humble while we still speak and representing a thousands-year-old tradition that connects us with the divine and trying to look at God's image in the world and speak justice without reducing it to a talking point and taking care of ourselves while also being omnipresent. This is tough stuff. And so what I've learned over the last number of years, more recently, is to tend to my inner life and to really seek out people who I get, who get me. And there won't be everyone. I want to be close with everyone, but I'm not going to be close with everyone.
Yeah.
And that's not how I felt when I started.
When you started, you wanted to feel close to everyone?
Yeah, I was literally poured. I was about to say it again without thinking about it.
Yeah.
Poured all out. And, you know, a dear Rebbe of mine, Ruth Messenger, said about my poetry that it's as if I slid open my heart and poured it onto the keyboard. And that was true about everything I was doing. And
which makes you very vulnerable too.
Yeah. And it might have been helpful for people. It might even have been good teaching, but it came at an enormous cost. And I think we have to be mindful as rabbis that it might not even be good for the community to have that raw, unfiltered experience from their rabbi. We might actually need to put on that masveh, that veil, once in a while, not to hide, but to be safe and to help our community be safe.
Yeah. Thank you. That's very valuable, because I'm a very passionate, deep feeling person like you, and I think like many people who choose this path. And I mean, but we are talking, so I'm talking about you and me, and so it's really helpful. And I think I do want to you know, where you were saying about putting on the mask, like the introduction to your book, where you were like, where you relate the story where you signed an open letter, I think back then, for marriage equality, and then someone from your shul was saying, we didn't know that we hired an activist, and how basically your entire book is a manifest of how you balance, you know, showing this passion and putting on that mask and being like this spiritual religious leader and an activist, whatever, however one wants to understand that. And so I think I kind of also want to go back to when I was saying that I was reading some of those essays that that even though so much time has passed, they can still be read together. And I think we would be amiss if we didn't mention what's going on in Israel right now, and that I did come across this essay, which was called The End of Theory, on page 143. I was reading this essay and I was like, this sounds like this could have been written. This could have been written today. It could have been written in response to, and I think my question, going back to how do we keep it going, and how does the rabbi's heart keep, you know, beating, obviously, but also believing in love and hope, and especially what's going on, you know, I know you posted about it, like all these anti-Semitic attacks that have been happening here, like in my neighborhood and in other cities. And yeah, I mean, how do we manage that? What kind of balance do we take on there as Jewish leaders?
As you asked the question, my red alert siren app just went off on my screen.
Yeah.
And I, you know, for those who don't know the essay that you're referring to, I was leading a progressive rabbinic mission for AIPAC to Israel in 2014. And we landed in the summer of 2014, literally just as the rockets started to fly from Gaza. And the essay is called The End of Theory because everything we thought we were there to encourage our colleagues and ourselves to really deepen an understanding of the justice work of activists on the ground between LGBTQ activists and shared society, Israeli Arab activists and Jewish activists for civil rights in Israel, and Jewish pluralism, and you name it. We were doing gorgeous work, coming to know each other better and understand Israel better, and how threatened Israel is, how vulnerable Israel is, despite all of the strength that it has. And we land, and we don't have to point to it anymore because it's literally headed at our heads. And that is an enormous part of the truth that needs to be spoken by rabbis right now, by religious leaders, because the world specifically sees everything but that. Right? Because there's no question that Palestinian vulnerability is not just real, it is ragged and ravaging. And to see the death and destruction in Gaza and to turn away because of my Jewish vulnerability is to not fulfill an authentic notion of Jewish holiness. I can't conduct myself with holiness if I don't acknowledge God's image being burned and buried in Gaza. And the blame game is less about holiness and more about survival. Because if the world does not notice both the terrorism by which Hamas is assaulting all of Israel and the military precision with which Israel, please God, is trying to minimize civilian casualties for all the death and destruction. I remember saying in 2014, and I think we need to shout it now. What if, God forbid, Israel was trying to hurt people? What if, God forbid, Israel actually used all of its might to end once and for all the terrorist threat that comes up every 5 years, every 7 years, or more frequently than that? The destruction would be complete, which is evidence that Israel is trying not to. But in the court of world opinion, a combination of intersectionality as a theory that is being promulgated without nuance, and that's not helpful. It's one of the reasons that I've focused on this book. I've been teaching Isabel Wilkerson's book, Cast, often because she does a really important job of weaving different sufferings, specifically between the Black experience in America, the experience of caste in India, and the experience of Jews under Nazi rule in Germany. And those are three different kinds of oppression and dehumanization. So to talk about Israel today requires that we understand both that incompatible narratives have political and military consequences, that the ethical use of power that Israel is called to use to defend all of its citizens, Jews and Arabs, is still horrid. It might be ethical, but we do not celebrate. And Iron Dome being a defensive posture it's such a fragile way to live.
Yeah.
So in these moments, to watch how Jewish responses, from rabbis too, are sometimes so knee-jerk reaction that they do not speak like mensches, either because we don't recognize the Jewish vulnerability. Some of us absolutely ricochet to say, look at the excesses of Israel's response. That's what some of us respond. Some of us respond with, I can't believe, again, look what those Arabs are doing to us, which I've heard from other rabbis too. And both of those responses are deeply problematic and dehumanizing. The really scary place that I think we must inhabit and we must make sure is tended to is a place that recognizes the humanity of Palestinians, talks about their suffering, and works toward peace when we are not in the midst of this, where we help the world understand the difference between geopolitics, which is Israel-Palestine, and justice within Israel, which is Arab-Israeli and Jewish-Israeli integration, shared society. Those are not the same things and require different responses, but people's careless thinking conflate them.
Yeah.
And we have to acknowledge, I have to acknowledge, that I am deeply traumatized as I speak about these things. In 2014, I stood right outside the Israeli Foreign Ministry after an alarm went off and we were in a bomb shelter for the 7th time that day. And I walked out, and right over my head, Iron Dome knocked out a rocket from Hamas. And so it would be foolish of me and unhealthy of me to not name that affected me.
Yeah.
And so how can we use our voices to be, to add health to the world and not just shrieks?
Mm-hmm.
And I think that, I've come to a definition of Zionism that works for me for now. My definition of Zionism is the ethical use of power we wish we didn't need. And Nebuch, as we say in Yiddish, we need it. We need it. My sister and her family, including her baby daughter, live in Tel Aviv. And for countless hours, during countless nights, they've all had to run for their lives, having only seconds to get to the shelter. My parents, as opposed to me landing in 2014 as the rocket started flying, my parents landed in Tel Aviv just a week ago Monday as the rocket started flying. And they don't move as fast as I moved. And my daughter is in Jerusalem, at least for now, not in the range of the rockets that have been fired. This is real. And so my heart breaks for the carnage in Gaza. And what Hamas is doing to the Palestinian civilians in Gaza is the worst of all of this, which very few people talk about. But my heart is pretty locally oriented. And the vulnerability of my immediate family, even though we're all family, is very weighty. And how we speak about this, I know I'm going on for a while, but let me share one last way of thinking about it. Elie Wiesel was once asked in a class at Boston University, where he was a professor at the time. Someone said, Professor Wiesel is a Jewish student. On Sunday, there are two marches. There's a march for solidarity with Soviet Jewry, who are not being allowed to leave the USSR. And there is a march against South African apartheid. Which one should I go to? And Elie Wiesel famously said, both, of course. But here's why you have to go to the March for Solidarity with Soviet Jewry. If you don't go to the March for Solidarity with Soviet Jewry, who's going to go to the march in solidarity with Soviet Jewry? Mm-hmm. Because there are moments, as we said before, that Yerushalayim, Ir Badad Yoshevet, that Jerusalem sits alone. And this feels like one of those moments where attacks in a sushi restaurant probably blocks from you, where I don't want to call them pro-Palestinian activists, because what they were hateful people who happened to be holding a flag. Hateful people who happened to be holding a flag started the attack by asking who's Jewish.
Right.
And also yesterday on the Upper East Side in Manhattan, there was a vicious, violent attack with people, again, who happen to be holding Palestinian flags, but don't represent the dignity Palestinians deserve. Throwing bottles at Jews, like glass bottles, and the police that were protecting them. So, this might not be the hopeful place to begin to wind down our conversation, but how essential it is for Jews in today's world to not forget Jewish history and current Jewish reality as we fight for universal justice. I cannot, I wear this bracelet every day, Black Lives Matter. And that's a phrase that in some parts of our Jewish community, people don't understand. But I cannot wear this if I'm dead. And that means Jewish survival is purposeful. It isn't only, it would be enough, but it's not only about not dying. But lo amut ki ehyeh, says the psalmist. I will not die, I will live, va'asaper maseyah, so that I can talk about the beauty of being connected to God in the world. So I think this moment of deep fragility calls us to attention so that we will live, and we will live purposefully to extend life everywhere.
Thank you. That's so many things you just said, then I wholeheartedly agree. In terms of winding down, as you said, well, yes, maybe this is not the most hopeful situation, and yet what you just said is expressing hope. And there's this other essay in the book where you talk about who has a national anthem that expresses that expresses hope, and that's just what it is, and it's a good thing. But I wanted to, like, you use the phrase careless thinking, and I think this is so important. You know, our tradition also says about how dangerous it is, and how we need to really, really guard our words because of all the danger and damage they can do, and how so much careless thinking comes before the careless speaking. And I think everything that you said, or that we've talked about, and that is in your book, is a testament to this appeal to careful thinking. And I just want to thank you for sharing, you know, your heart. And by the way, your heart, you know, when we talk about what I learned in my first year, going back to the very initial question about how has it been, you know, it's so interesting that today when we talk about like keva and kevana, and how often it's we moderns understand the heart to be sort of like the emotions and the passions, which is true, which it is there, and it makes sense, and love poetry and everywhere there's obviously a lot of these imagery. But at the same time, the rabbis understood the heart as the place for thoughts. And that's like just a beautiful symbiosis. Anyway, that's sort of like my thought that I'm sitting with at the end of our conversation.
Well, my friend, heart to heart, I'm really, really grateful, even in the midst of, you know, this is a very intense way to continue and build our conversation. I'm really grateful that you are where you are. I'm really grateful for the learning that you're doing, but also the loving that you're doing, the wanting to tend to the world, wanting to sustain, you know, our own health as we do this work, and wanting to lead our people in a way that is thoughtful, that makes sure that the fierce emotions that we channel do good for people. So I know that that's true about you, and I'm really, really excited that we had this conversation and that it won't be our last. So,
God willing, it won't. Yes. Thank you so much.
You're welcome. All of us out there, take care. Bless you all.
Bye.
Bye, everybody.